relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. An interesting bit of news that comes to us by way of the land down under, Australia. Tasman Boxers joins forces with DAZN Boxing to present the finest in Australian boxing. The future is now. Subscribe now at DAZN.com to enjoy world-class boxing from around the globe on the world's greatest online sports streaming platform. I remember when DAZN first debuted in America. I think they were only operating in about 8 or 9 countries at that time, and it has since expanded to approximately 175, 178, 200, maybe more.
And I remember when they debuted in America, a certain section of the YouTube boxing community heralded their end, that they'd never be able to make a dent in America or attract any relevant talent in this country. They would go under, and the opposite has happened. Only the opposite has happened since then, since they debuted in America. They've only gotten bigger, only expanded their area of operations.
They're bigger now than they were then.
And even now, there are those out there who refuse to acknowledge many of the big shows. The big shows DAZN has put on in the United Kingdom, the United States. There are still those who are in denial.
They'll tell you in a heartbeat about DAZN losing $1 billion or $2 billion when they first got off the ground.
Which is only half the story, because while there were losses, there are always losses when you're starting up something new, and those losses were calculated losses. The effort to acquire the sports rights.
They'll tell you that it's Eddie Hearn that costed DAZN $2 billion, that he lost them that money, and people actually believe this.
You really can't underestimate how stupid some people are, and you can't fix stupid. You can only marvel at it.
Now, Matchroom, who works with DAZN, they've already made their Australian debut, and now DAZN has gone as far as jumping into bed with a native promotional outfit.
A local one in Tasman Fighters, who we've talked about on a number of occasions here on this channel. The shows they do in Australia, they're a local outfit that will now be featured globally on the DAZN platform. Opetaia, one of their fighters, their champions, reacted to the news by saying, "This is huge news for all of us at Tasman and for Australian boxing fans. I've now got the best broadcaster in boxing behind me to show me defending my titles. Bring it on."
DAZN continues to grow and expand their area of operations.
It is a welcome bit of news, because that's that much more content for existing DAZN subscribers here in the United States. To some, that's value for money. To others, foreign fighters.
Some are more xenophobic than others, especially here in the United States. Large tribal element and the tribal contingent of boxing fans. They're not interested in UK fighters or Australian fighters or really anything that isn't American.
We'll leave such individuals to their devices. Attention now turns to reigning IBF and Ring Magazine champion Opetaia, who's currently in talks to take on his mandatory challenger Riakporhe, who was elevated to that position after Masternak went in another direction. Initially, Masternak was Opetaia's mandatory.
Masternak went in a different direction.
And discussions are now ongoing to finalize an ordered fight between IBF Cruiserweight World Champion Opetaia and mandatory challenger Riakporhe. If the deal is reached, the fight would land in southeast Queensland. According to Opetaia's manager, Mick Francis, the fight is targeted for August 23rd, possibly at the Gold Coast Convention and Exhibition Center, and he hopes a deal will get finalized by July 14th.
If the fight lands in Australia, that has to mean Opetaia's team are the ones at the helm of promotion. Opetaia, who recently had a legal skirmish with Dean Lonergan.
Up until recently was promoting Opetaia's fights. If he's set to return to action towards the end of this winter in Australia, that must mean that they've reached some reconciliation and Jay is able to move forward with his career. Jay is the champion, and he should have the opportunity to have his first defense in Australia, Francis said to The Age. That's the whole thing about winning a world title, is you hustle, you hustle, you hustle, and when you finally win, why should you keep hustling? Jay has been out of the ring for a year on Sunday, so he's been out for quite a while. So the last thing that personally we need to do is take Jay to the UK in a foreign territory with 20,000 screaming palms wanting his blood. We're trying to bring that fight here to Australia, and it's looking very positive.
We've had talks with the local council and state government, which are both motivated.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown, that's what they say. Jay Opetaia hasn't had a fight since becoming IBF Cruiserweight Champion. Opposite the ring, Mavis Breedis, then champion, who broke his jaw in 2 places.
A hard-fought fight.
But a great fight and a great performance from Jay Opetaia, whose people say, we've had talks with the local council and state government, which are both motivated to bring a big fight to Queensland, especially on the back of what Jay did a year ago. Last year, Opetaia pulled off an upset when he secured a dominant decision win over Mavis Breedis to capture the IBF World title on the Gold Coast. Opetaia won the bout, but despite suffering a broken jaw in the bout, the goal for Opetaia is to unify the entire weight class, a goal that Alexander Usyk managed to accomplish in 2018.
2023, Jay's got some stiff competition at cruiserweight. You've got Badu Jack holding the WBC title, newly crowned WBO champion Chris Billam-Smith.
He's got the WBO Arsene Goulamarian. He's got the WBA. Important tidbits and notes is that the guy he's about to fight, unbeaten Richard Riakporhe,
It's a hard puncher.
he is the only man to beat Chris Billam-Smith, this division's newly crowned reigning WBO champion.
Richard's a knockout merchant.
Talented one. Jay Opetaia, wants to unify all the titles, and Chris Billam-Smith has got the WBO belt. And that's the belt Jay has always wanted to fight for.
I've been around sports people for a long time, but I can honestly say Jay Opetaia has got the best motor. He's the hardest trainer, and he's got the best attitude I've ever seen in any athlete.
He's gonna need it. Richard Riakporhe will service as a common opponent between Jay and Chris Billam-Smith, who's supposed to be in action very soon opposite the ring, Masternak.
Richard can punch.
Jay Opetaia fights out of the southpaw stance. He's athletic, he can move, and he can punch a bit himself. He's fast. The caveat is he hasn't fought in a year.
If the fight goes down in Queensland, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the UK rights to the fight go to Sky and the US rights to the fight go to DAZN.
Wouldn't be at all surprised to see the foreign rights to the fight break down in such a way. Lest we forget, Richard Riakporhe has been boxing on the Sky Sports and Boxer side of things. I imagine that Ben Shalom and the people over there at Boxer wanted this to go down in the UK, but you hear what Team Opetaia is saying. They want it in Australia.
They might get it.
Home field advantage for the home fighter, Jay Opetaia, in what would be his maiden title defense as a defending champion would be a somber day.
For Tasman fighters, for DAZN, who just jumped into bed with them, if he loses the title so soon after winning it.
His best bet to offset Richard Riakporhe's power is movement, angles.
Jay's athletic, he can move.
And he's a southpaw, so if he moves to his right, stays on the outside of Richard Riakporhe's jab, and doesn't spend too much time in the pocket, he might be able to, at minimum, outpoint Richard.
Yeah.
Power can be worked around. We've seen it many times.
He's got to work around Richards.
Hope this fight gets made in a jiffy. It's been a long time since we've seen Jay in action. He's got to remind people who he is.
What he can do.
Just in keeping with the theme of all things cruiserweight, Richard Riakporhe wants Chris Billam-Smith rematch now that Chris is a champion. I have much more to my game than Lawrence Okolie. Lawrence Okolie, who Chris beat for the WBO title.
Funny old game, this boxing, that years ago, Richard Riakporhe gave Chris his first professional loss, but Chris beat Richard to a title.
Even if he didn't have to beat Richard to do it, Richard, who believes the stage is now set for the rematch, saying that's big, and that's how we kind of envisioned the rematch, on that stage, at that level. And what better time? The time is now. Why not? Riakporhe told Sky Sports. So let's just see how it all pans out. We're going to have some meetings next week, and we're going to see what happens. I don't want to take nothing away from CBS. CBS, you've done something amazing. You beat an undefeated champion, and in that fashion, a few knockdowns, and you won clearly. You have to give him respect or his due. I don't want to come and rain down on the parade as well, because it's his night. But of course, we want to let him enjoy that, and then we can talk some business. These comments from Richard are from several weeks ago. Several weeks later, Richard Riakporhe has his own title fight, his own champion to take on.
He's going to be fighting Jay Opetaia, who I just mentioned.
In an ideal world, at least ideal for Boxer, Richard would beat Jay Opetaia, Chris Billam-Smith would beat Matthias Masternak, then the two champions could meet each other in the United Kingdom for the rematch, what would be a unification fight. fight.
For Boxer, that would be ideal, though in the real world, especially the world of boxing, things are seldom ever ideal. Matthias Masternak has a lot more experience than Chris Billam-Smith, and he can punch.
They're supposed to be fighting. Richard Riakporhe may end up traveling abroad to challenge Jay Opetaia for the red belt. Jay's going to have home field advantage, and Jay is quite formidable. It's conceivable that maybe Richard don't win that fight.
Maybe not.
But Richard Riakporhe believes that he'll provide a much tougher test than O'Coley did should he fight Chris for a second time, saying, "If anybody knows me, I know I have much more in my game than O'Coley anyway," Riakporhe said. "I have a good IQ now. I know what I'm doing. I have experience. He would have to deal with a lot more than just trying to take away my right hand. My last, let's say, 4 fights, I've probably knocked them out with my left hand. So that's something else that you need to think about."
It's not necessary that Richard beat Jay Opetaia to stage a rematch between him and Chris. It would be ideal, but it's not a requisite.
If he goes to Australia and he suffers his first professional loss, that's hardly the end of the world. He could go back to the UK and still stage a rematch with Chris. Chris just has to make sure he beats Masternak.
That's it.
They could do good business with that fight. They still could. That rematch between Chris and Richard, especially in Bournemouth, where Chris Billam-Smith is from, where he draws pretty well. They got a good-sized audience for that Lawrence O'Coley fight.
Because Chris won, that only adds to his marquee value, his profile.
You're always hearing about how loyal the UK fight fans are. They definitely showed up to support Chris Billam-Smith, and he held up his end of the bargain by actually winning the fight. So, Smith versus Riakporhe 2. That could still do good business, even if Richard Riakporhe don't win in Australia.
It's all right.
Boxer certainly could use a fight like that, a high-profile fight like that, in the United Kingdom.
They need the content.
They need to keep up with the Joneses, the people over there at Matchroom and the people over there at Queensbury. Ben Shalom has his work cut out for him. In truth, he's always had his work cut out for him as the new kid on the block.
This is a good fight to make.
Even if we're not on the eve of it, first, Chris has got to take care of business with Matthias Masternak. Richard, he's got to hope that he can win a title abroad, hope that he can win in hostile territory, on foreign soil, against a young unbeaten champion.
We'll see what happens.
Upstairs at heavyweight, you might have already heard earlier today that Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte's rematch is official, set for August 12th at the O2 Arena in London.
It's good to have a fight down on paper for what is today's stagnant heavyweight division. Things have really slowed down up there.
British heavyweight rivals Anthony Joshua and Dillian Whyte will meet in an explosive rematch at the O2 in London on Saturday, August 12th, shown exclusively live on DAZN around the world and on DAZN pay-per-view in the UK and Ireland. Two-time unified heavyweight world champion Anthony Joshua and the former world title challenger Dillian Whyte lock horns again nearly 8 years on from their British title fight in Greenwich, which Joshua won by way of a 7th-round stoppage to end a thrilling war. "I've been clear that my plan is to be active this year," said Joshua. "August 12th is the date. I'll be ready to fight. I look forward to dealing with the business."
This will be Anthony Joshua's second fight this year. The first was the Jermaine Franklin fight.
Anthony, who's been boxing once a year for the last 3 years or so. He hasn't boxed more than once a year since 2019.
Fought 2 times that year, the 2 Andy Ruiz fights, the loss and the rematch.
If he beats Dillian Whyte in August and moves forward with the Deontay Wilder showdown in December, that will mark his 3rd fight of this year. And Anthony Joshua hasn't fought 3 times in a single calendar year since all the way back there in 2016. That's the last time he fought 3 times in a single year.
Got to take care of Dillian.
Dillian Whyte, Brixton's Whyte, has a long-running rivalry with Anthony Joshua. Having beaten the Watford man on points as an amateur back in 2009, Joshua won an Olympic gold medal in London in 2012, which kick-started his meteoric rise to global stardom. AJ went on to unify the heavyweight division, winning the WBA, IBF, and WBO titles and the IBO crown with a string of wins against the likes of Charles Martin, Vladimir Klitschko, Joseph Parker, Alexander Povetkin, Andy Ruiz, and Kubrat Pulev. The 33-year-old convincingly outpointed Jermaine Franklin at the O2 earlier this year as he returned to his winning ways under new trainer Derek James, following back-to-back losses to Ukrainian pound-for-pound great Oleksandr Usyk. Whyte, whose last win also came via a points decision against the United States' own Franklin last year, fell short in his record-breaking world title challenge against undefeated WBC ruler Tyson Fury, who still has yet to announce a fight.
Rumor has it his next appearance will be an exhibition with Francis Ngannou. That's a fucking joke.
He's supposed to be king shit at heavyweight. That's what he's supposed to be. Yet here you have Anthony Joshua announcing a fight, Dillian Whyte as well. You have Alexander Usyk and Daniel Dubois. They officially announced their fight earlier today.
Take care of business.
Was Anthony Joshua's plan to be a more active fighter, a busier fighter this year? And so far, so good. That's what he looks to be doing. Alexander Usyk, he's going to be taking care of business against his mandatory challenger.
He's not going to get Tyson Fury in December. The story is he's supposed to be fighting another mandatory in Croatia's Filip Hrgovic by way of the IBF.
No Fury.
As far as Joshua versus Whyte too, Dillian Whyte says, I'm looking forward to returning to London O2 in August and going to war. It's 1-1, so this is the decider.
Dillian Whyte having won their amateur bout and Anthony Joshua knocking him out in the pro ranks. You see what he's getting at. In the UK and Ireland, the pay-per-view will cost $26.99 in terms of pounds.
I don't think it's going to be a pay-per-view in America.
I can't quite believe this fight is happening, and there was absolutely no stopping either man, said Matchroom Sport chairman Eddie Hearn. The rivalry runs deep, and there is something about these two where they will never back down from each other. At times, it may have looked like a game of bluff, but now we are set, and with everything that's on the line, this is an absolute must-win for both. Just like the first time at the O2, get ready for fireworks August 12th.
I know that not a lot of people were asking for a Joshua versus Whyte rematch, but I will admit that I'm more interested, more intrigued by that than watching Tyson Fury waltz around the ring with an MMA fighter.
If you're saying that the rematch is pointless, well, what do you think about Fury versus Chisora 3? That was pretty fucking pointless. And what about what he's about to do with Francis Ngannou? What's the point in that?
This is a belt holder. This guy's a champion.
Ridiculous. It is great to have Anthony Joshua back fighting on the platform so soon after his fight in April, said Joe Markowski, CEO of North America's DAZN Group. We want AJ in the biggest fights, and in Dillian Whyte, this is a massive one, reigniting a feud that has bubbled away for well over a decade. August 12th promises to be fireworks. Watch a night of all-out action, live and exclusive on DAZN around the world and on DAZN pay-per-view in the UK.
Dillian Whyte is now trained by Buddy McGirt. Anthony's with Derek James. Some time has passed since they first met.
This isn't my first choice for Anthony Joshua's next fight, but I'll take it. I'll take it because there's more point in it than what Tyson Fury's about to do, than who he's about to fight. If he does end up fighting Francis Ngannou, I'm not buying that.
It's pointless.
Whereas Joshua versus Whyte at least services as a stay busy fight en route to an even bigger one.
The Wilder fight.
So long as Anthony can take care of business in August.